How do you have a civil conversation when you're entering into a hot button conversation? Stay tuned. We are going to talk to Alice and get the scoop when she gives us her communication tips. Alice, I have been so excited about bringing you on to the show. When you and I met, I don't know, it was fairly recently. We were connected by a mutual business associate, and I liked that you do mediations because I used to do mediations, and we spent some time talking about that. And so I knew I was going to be excited. I needed to get you onto the podcast. So before we get into your tips, tell our audience who you are and what you do.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me, Traci. I'm very excited because we are fellow passionate communicators. And so I have been looking forward to this podcast episode because I can talk about the things that we are both so passionate about. I do a couple of different things. So I do mediations. I do a lot of divorce mediations as well as workplace conflict mediations. And I also work with people in organizations where they need communication coaching, conflict resolution coaching, and perhaps even negotiation coaching. So I work with anyone who basically wants to level up their negotiation and communication skills.
I like it. So when we talked about mediating, I was sharing with you, I know that there's like just the general mediation certificate, but then you can specialize in that. I did juvenile victim offender, and I did family, and I did civil. And I think I was sharing with you the juvenile victim offender cases stayed with me for days. Those were so heart wrenching. And then the civil ones, honestly, I didn't really care for those because I felt like it was just big baby pouting kind of stuff. Like usually it was like, this was not necessary to bring this here. Like, say I'm sorry and go your separate ways. So I didn't really care about those. And then the family was sort of in between. Those were hard because you had, hearts involved. Usually it was children related, that kind of thing. So, of the cases you do, talk to me about what has your heart, just talk through all the things.
Sure. So what's interesting is that people always react and they say to me, oh my gosh, I don't know how you could do divorces. That seems really like a horrible place to sit in, right? But actually, I find those to be easier because everyone has the same goal in mind, which is let's split up. So it's just a matter of how do we split things up? Whereas if you're going to do like a family mediation, a divorce has maybe been 5 to 10 years where there's been conflict and they finally decide to get a divorce. A family can be 40, 50, 60 years, right?
Yes.
It can be from when you were a child, and you could have decades of grudges that you have built up against your sibling or your parent.
Yes.
And so even like raising the eyebrow or looking at somebody a certain way is setting them off.
Right. Those hot buttons, pushing that button. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like deeper wounds
Yes.
in family mediations. And so it's very hard to keep the calm because I might not notice the eyebrow coming up, but someone else in that family is like, I know what that means. I know what you're thinking. Just because your eyebrow went up, I know exactly what you're thinking, and it's not good. Right.
Right.
And
Right.
so it's a little bit harder to control the temperature in the room because very small things can trigger a party in the mediation.
Yes.
So, yeah. And then with workplace conflicts, it's interesting because the parties who are in the mediation are usually not willing participants, right? So mediation in and of itself, it is a voluntary process. So both parties are coming together to say, let's resolve this. We want to make sure that we get this conflict out of the way. In a workplace conflict situation, it could be that HR mandated for them to go to mediation.
Yes.
Now you have two people who may not at all have the same goal in mind. Like their goal may not be, I would like to work better with Traci and Traci would like to work better with me. More likely, it sounds something like this. Alice would like Traci to get fired because she believes Traci is incompetent. And Traci would like Alice to get fired because she believes Alice is racist and sexist and all of the bad things.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
And so those are also very difficult to resolve if they don't have the same goal in mind, which is let's get along, let's work together.
Yes. I can imagine, because I'm assuming when you were being trained, there was that whole idea of being there in good faith.
Yes.
Let's be there. Are you here in good faith? And very often the family ones are mandated by a judge. And so you could tell, I don't know if you're the same, you can kind of tell like who's really there in good faith and who's like biding their time. Oh, I was here for 2 hours. We're dipping. So,
Yes.
yeah.
Yes. Or they're like, I'm here because I was forced to be here. I will just talk for the entire duration. And then I can go back to the judge and tell them, oh, we tried it, but it
Yes.
didn't work. Yes. You can
Yes.
totally see through that.
Yes, absolutely. Oh, you're kind of making me miss mediating. My very first case, I don't even remember what it was about, but it was a train wreck. And so where I volunteer mediated, it was two, and usually a man and a woman would go in together. And so the man that I was with had been doing it for years. And at the end of it, he was like, I have never had one go that poorly. And I'm like, okay, at least this is not the norm. But I stuck with it. And, I kind of reluctantly walked away because my life was getting so busy that I just couldn't do those volunteer hours anymore. So anyhow, but I liked it while it lasted. So anyhow, okay. I suspect that some of what you talked about with the families and all of those little telltale signs and the years, the decades built up, that you might be maybe you're going to approach some of that in your tips today. So, obviously, we are the Communicate Great podcast. And so we share tips on communicating. So, what do you have for us? Lay it on.
So this is the hardest one to implement. Okay. My very first tip. It's the easiest one to say, and it's the hardest one to implement. Come to the conversation without judgment.
Yes.
Right? Because if you show up, you told me a story earlier about someone who had judgment. When you show up with judgment, you effectively are showing up with a closed door already to communication.
Yes.
That you're signaling it doesn't matter what you have to say. I'm not listening to what you have to say. I'm not processing what you're having to say. And like, there's going to be no communication. That's basically what judgment is. It is a closed door.
Yes, I agree.
And so you don't want to show up and say, by the way, anyone who thinks this way is an idiot, because that is actually not an invitation to a true conversation.
Yes.
You're basically saying, by the way, I'm showing up. It sounds like I'm inviting you, but actually I'm letting you know there's a locked door here in between us. It is locked. I'm not unlocking it, and we're not going to have a conversation, right? So if you truly want to show up and have a deeper conversation with someone, you have to show up, number one, without judgment. So that's number one. Number two, you really should show up. Your agenda, and this is everyone's agenda, it should not be to try to change that person so that they think like you do. Okay? Because everyone that does that, we all know that that fails, right? So you don't want to, if you want to influence someone, that's not the way to influence them. Okay, is not showing up and saying, let me tell you why you need to think like me. Because we all know no one's influenced that way.
Right.
So right? You want to show up and you want to be interested in what the other person has to say. So you want to prioritize the other person. You always want to prioritize the other person and say, hey, Traci, like, what do you think of this? Or tell me why you think that. Or what led you to think these things? That's the start of the conversation.
Yes.
And then based on what you say, I can ask deeper questions and also leave judgment at the door.
Yes.
Even if I do not agree with you, you can turn that judgment off. And how do I know this? Because as a mediator, I have to show up as a neutral party. It does not matter if I think people's actions are terrible, immoral, unethical. It doesn't matter because I have to stay neutral. And so what does that look like? It looks like you turn off your thoughts that are judgy thoughts when you're sitting in the conversation. So you don't want to be thinking thoughts like, this person doesn't know what they're talking about. They're an idiot. I can't believe the person is thinking these things. Like all these thoughts you need to turn off.
Yes, I agree. I agree. Yes.
Right?
Okay.
Because
Go ahead. No, go
the
ahead.
communi-
I have two
the
things.
commun-
Go ahead.
the communication very like I think they said like I don't remember the number, but like 7% is verbal. And
Yes.
like probably 93% is nonverbal. You've got facial expressions, you have body language, you have tone of voice, you have attitude. All of that is going to display your judgment and your bias if you are running a thought process underneath your words. Your words do not have to say anything judgy, just your tone will just show up with that, right?
Yes, that is huge. And by the way, I was reading an article recently that dispelled that 93 and 7%. But I have to tell you, and you would probably agree, being in the communication area, I don't know that I agreed with the article that said, oh, that's not true. And they basically said, well, here was the person who ran the study, and here was the bias there, and that kind of thing. But man, actions speak louder than words 100%.
Yes.
You can't convince me otherwise. So, what I was going to say, remind me listening, because I'm going to probably go, what was I going to remind me listening? But just to share with the audience why I was laughing, that when you and I were about to start the podcast, I was sharing with you that I had met somebody, had never met with them before. It was a Zoom meeting. They were out of the country, and the person started the conversation, and it was a mutual introduction. Started the conversation with, if you think this way, or everybody who thinks this way has a quarter of a brain or less than a quarter of a brain or something like that. Well, that was my thought. And so immediately they started, when you were talking about starting with a shut door. And so I tried explaining, well, here is why I believe this way, ABC. And then the person proceeded to argue with me every time I said something, argued with me. So what I was picturing was that shut door, but not just a shut door, but like lock after lock after lock after lock, all the way up and down the door. And you're not getting through. And so when you were saying that, I just wanted to share with the audience that that was my very recent experience. So that was number one. I wanted to share that. Number two, listening is a huge part of this. And so I don't know if you're going to talk about listening in a second, but you say, you know, go into it with asking questions and why do you think this way, but not thinking through your rebuttal, but truly being in that moment. And so that advice is huge, because so often when we're sharing what we think, you're formulating your rebuttal. So I agree. And I really like what you said about that. Okay, that was it. Next.
Yeah, definitely. So, active listening includes not creating your rebuttal while the other person is talking. So, in order to know that you yourself has succeeded in active listening, is the fact that you should be able to repeat back what you heard and have already processed it, right? So, if you say something to me, what I usually do, if it's you don't do this in like light conversation, right? If you tell me about your vacation, I'm not going to, show you everything that I've heard. But if it's a difficult conversation, it could be a political conversation, religious conversation, something about something that's very meaningful to the both of us, and we're on a different page. A very good phrase to use is, okay, Traci, let me make sure I am understanding your point. And then I go into every detail of what you explained, because I want to make sure that in my heated emotional state, I actually heard everything you said. When people are feeling strong emotions because they're passionate about whatever it is, your capacity to listen is severely diminished. Severely. You don't realize it, but it goes down to like 10%. So whatever the other person is saying, you're only hearing 10% because you are so upset. about what is happening. And so if I'm the speaker, I will slow down the tempo of what I am saying. And it's not even going to be noticeable because the other person is so angry, they're literally just picking up the few words that I'm saying. If
Right.
I speak at a normal cadence when someone's upset, they will literally take just a few words in and that's it. They're not going to hear it. How do I know this? Because as a mediator, when I recognize somebody is looking like they're upset, I will say something like, Traci, can you let me know what it is that you heard before you respond? And if you are very, very upset, this is what you're going to say. First, you're going to go like this. And then you're going to say, you said something about listening, and how something about that was really important. And
I
that's all I
like
got. And I'll be like, that's everything? And you'll say, yeah, that's all I remember. Literally, people cannot remember at all. And
right.
maybe they don't even realize that they tuned out, but they tuned out. So you have to be aware of yourself, that you yourself, if you're feeling triggered, you're actually not processing anything anymore. So you probably should be aware enough to say, Traci, I'm actually not in a good place to be able to have this conversation right now because I'm kind of upset. Let's take a break. Let
Yes.
me calm myself down and
Yes.
then we can re-engage. You don't ever want to just continue, just walk out and never come back to the conversation because then that's considered
Right.
stonewalling, right? You don't want to stonewall, but you want to respect the other person. Yes, it was upsetting to you. It is not their job to calm you down. It is your own job to calm yourself down. And then come back later and say, okay, Traci, I'm feeling a little bit better. Let's continue the conversation where we left off.
Yes, and that is huge. I've also done conflict coaching. And I've done some workshops on managing or navigating conflict, the potential conflict. And so that is one of the things that I will tell people also. So yes, we agree there that there are times when you need a timeout. And so maybe you say, "Hey, Alice, I just need a timeout. Let's get back together in X amount of time." Or I need a timeout. I'm going to go do this and I'll come back. And if you're ready to continue the conversation, then we can, I would love to get this, figured out. So I like that you gave that advice. Yes, I agree with that. Love it.
It even happens if you're a parent. If your child is triggering you and you're really angry, that is not a good time to have a conversation about the consequences because you are triggered and you should never be issuing a consequence based on how angry you are. You need to go and, because number one, you're modeling a very bad model for your child,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
So you want to model good behavior, which is, okay, child, I'm kind of mad right now. Let me just go take care of myself. I will come back and we can talk about this because I'm not okay with what's happening. But you want to model that behavior. You don't want to say, I'm angry. I'm going to exact revenge on you. So
Exactly.
I'm going to tell you that this is the punishment because it makes me feel better. No, you need to say, I'm going to go control my own emotions. I'm going to get them down. Then
Yes.
I'm going to come back and we're going to have a civil conversation about what happened, why it's not okay, and maybe what we can do as a reasonable consequence.
I like that. And that is something that I tried to do. Did I do it every single time? No. But I was trying to be aware of I am about to flip my S. I'm going to go. I'll be back. We'll talk about this in a minute. Yeah.
Yes.
Yes. I like that. That's huge. That is huge in parenting. Okay. I like it. Okay. Next.
So let's see what else. So another really good thing to do is to make sure that when you repeat back whatever it is the person says, you also want to try to pinpoint what emotion you think the other person is feeling. To say things like, okay, it sounds like you're, sad that I didn't do the thing that we agreed on, or it seems like you're very disappointed in the way that this project, you know, landed or whatever. And you want to try to pinpoint the emotion because what you do is you are making the other person feel seen,
Yes.
right?
Hmm.
And so then they're like, oh, Like Alice sees me. She understands how I'm feeling. Now,
Mhm.
sometimes people say to me, well, I'm not comfortable because what if I say the wrong thing? What if I say disappointed and you're not disappointed? Well, guess what's going to happen? I'm going to correct you,
Exactly.
right?
Exactly.
And so it's okay. You want to go ahead and try to name the thing that you are seeing because you want them to recognize that I am hearing what you're saying and I'm seeing what's happening,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
So, listening, number one, repeating back what it is that you heard by
Mhm.
saying, and you don't want, so another caveat, I don't want you to just repeat it back because people will say, oh, I know what I said, Alice. You don't have to repeat it back, right? Or why are you parroting everything I'm saying? So you don't want to do it that way. You
Right.
always want to say what it is that you're doing, which is, let me make sure that I understood you correctly.
Correct.
What I heard
Mhm.
you say is, because now they're listening to make sure that you got it right,
Yes.
right? They are
Yes.
now being a judge to say, okay, did she listen to everything? Did she get everything? And I ask at the end of it, did I get it right? Is that everything? And then you can verify, you got most of it, but you missed this other critical piece,
Yes.
right? And you can like, again, inform me.
Yep.
And then I talk about how it is that I think that I've made you feel.
Yes.
And then now we can have a real conversation.
Yes.
Now, if it's about something where someone is not agreeing with you politically, here's an interesting one. So my brother is a Catholic priest. So obviously he's going to be pro-life. I am on the opposite side of the fence of that. So we had a very lovely civil discourse about it because I asked him a lot of different questions. And I was asking, well, what if this happens? And what if that happens? And so it was more of a discovery conversation
Yes.
as opposed to trying to make him wrong or him trying to make me wrong. It was more of a let me just try to understand like why you feel that way. And let me also try to understand, do you feel that way in this circumstance, in this circumstance, in this circumstance? And how does that go? And how does that play out in your life? And so I learned more about why he thinks the way he thinks. And that is all that we can ever ask for.
Right, right. We talk about asking those curiosity questions, and that is huge because when you are having that door with the lock after lock after lock, how does that make somebody feel loved and seen and heard? It does not. And so these are the kinds of things that are so important to our relationships and the health of our relationships. Okay, so here's a question for you. You talked about, you and I are talking, and I say, hey, Alice, I just want to make sure I understand. Here is what you said, da 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 da, and it seems to me you're feeling da 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 da. Where am I wrong? That kind of thing. But what if you want that from the other person? How would you suggest that our listeners go about asking for that without being offensive?
So I'm very glad that you asked that question. So I coach people like in the mediation session. So one of the really good things, this is a really good communication tool that almost no one uses in regular life because it feels very formulaic.
Yeah.
But setting ground rules before having a difficult conversation, it is like magic. I don't even know how to describe it, but if you set up the ground rules, everyone follows those rules as long as you've agreed to it before. Do not even think that if you're setting up the ground rules in the middle of the conversation, it will work because it will not.
Right.
Like if you say, hey, Tracy, you're interrupting me. If we did not make any rules beforehand that we're not going to interrupt, it's not going to work. You cannot just in the middle of it say to somebody, stop interrupting me because they're going to be so heated that they're just going to be like, I don't care, whatever.
Right.
However, if you, before you go into the conversation, say, I know this is going to be a difficult conversation. If we can set up a few ground rules, like let's both agree not to interrupt. And you can do something silly like putting a timeout signal if someone's interrupting, or just saying you're interrupting, and just taking accountability and saying, oh, okay, sorry, I interrupted, right? So that
Right.
kind of thing. So set up that and say, like, let's not denigrate one another. Let's not put each other down. Let's not insult each other.
Yes.
Let's not raise our voices at one another. Let's not use the words lie, liar, or lying. Instead, let's just say, I have a different perspective,
Right.
right? And so setting some ground rules goes a long, long way in having a productive discussion when it is a difficult conversation. Because if you and I have both agreed that we're not going to interrupt, the minute I interrupt, when you say, I'm sorry, I'm not done yet, I'll say, okay, sorry. Because I know that I already promised you that I'm not going to interrupt. But if we never had that conversation and suddenly we're heated, probably I don't really care. I'm like, I don't care if I'm interrupting you. I never agree that I'm not going to interrupt you. I'm really mad. I don't want to have anything. I don't want to hear what you have to say. So I'm going to interrupt you, right? But setting those ground rules, it's like paving a map, and now everyone has the same direction they're going in, the same street signs, you know what I mean? And so you
Yes.
can get there. But if you're like, I don't care about your map looks different from my map, and your street signs look different from my street signs, and they were just gonna be trying, and most people that's why we have so much conflict in the world, because people aren't following the same traffic signals.
I like that, and that is true. And that is one of the things that being trained as a mediator, we are taught that. And then sitting in those mediations and saying, before we start, we're going to go over our ground rules. That's huge. And so I didn't think about it until you just said it. But yeah, how often do we follow, just in general, as a society, as people of the world, how often do we do that? Now, because of my training, I did try to implement some of that. And we had some of my trainings. I don't know. Somebody gave me the floor, and it was a magnet, so you could put it on the refrigerator or keep it somewhere. Have you seen those? It's like a tiled floor, and it's who has the floor. That's who's talking. I don't know if you've ever seen anything like that. And then there were times where I didn't have a floor, and so I would say, this is going to represent the floor. If I have it, I'm the one speaking. And when I'm done, I will hand it to you. So then you have the whole problem of, and I don't know if you have a solution for this. I've got it, and 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 I'm not giving it to you. What would you recommend for that? Do you have any little
I
tips
do.
for that?
I
Okay.
do. And I haven't heard of the floor, but I've heard of like the talking stick. So it's like when I have this talking stick, right?
Yeah.
So it's funny that you asked that, because I actually have a strategy that I use in my mediations. I don't know that other people do that, but this is something that I have implemented for myself, because I know that people can talk for a long time. So this is what I will say. I will say, in the mediations, I will say, when it is your turn to talk, you have the floor. You can speak. However, I'm going to ask that you keep it to around 5 minutes or less.
Oh, I like
Now,
that.
and then I'll explain why. I will say, because if you are the one listening, it is very difficult to hold that volume of information beyond 5 minutes. It becomes like a lot of information that the other person is like,
Wow.
I cannot remember everything you said. I cannot respond to everything that you said. It is too much information. But 5 minutes, people can kind of like respond to. And so what I've noticed is, number one, people are like, oh, okay, I think I'm getting to my 5 minutes now. So they will wrap it up. I do let them know very specifically, I am not timing you. I'm not going to be like, hard stop, it's 5 minutes. If you want to time yourself, please feel free, because some people claim that they have time blindness, so they don't know how much time has passed. So, okay, fine. Look at your watch and look at the time, and then just speak. And when it's around 5 minutes, you can be like, okay, I need to wrap it up.
Right.
Or if it's really egregious, if you're like in a relationship where the people are not, you can just say, okay, let's just do like the little chess timers, or, where you push the button and then it's your time to talk goes up and down,
Right.
or your phone. There's like so many different ways that you can solve for
Right.
that. But I do set up a rule that says, try to keep it to around 5 minutes. Be mindful of that, because beyond 5 minutes, the other person cannot remember everything you have said.
I love that. That is huge. I never used something like that. I didn't think of it. What I would do in your way, I'm so glad you told me about that. I would just kind of start watching, the facial expressions and the body language. And when it felt like they were starting to repeat the same things, it's like, okay, they don't have anything new to add. I would interject. And one of my rules and the ground rules is, you can't interrupt each other, but I can interrupt you to keep things flowing in a productive way. And so I would try to interject and say, okay, well, let's let the other person respond to what you just said. But I like what you said, and you explained it in terms of if we're really trying to be productive here, anything over 5 minutes, they're going to have a hard time. And then how productive is that? So I really like that. I like it. Yay,
Yeah.
yay. Okay.
I mean, when people hear that, they really abide by that. They will frequently say, okay, I think that's my 5 minutes now. So people police themselves. So with ground rules, you don't have to do a lot of policing because people police themselves.
I like it. Yay. Okay. All right. Do you have any other tips before we wrap this up?
I think that when you are having, if you want to convince somebody of something or you want to persuade someone of something, I think showing up with the right kind of energy, right? Because energy is transferable, right? If I show up and I'm happy, probably the people around me are going to feel like, oh, she brings a lot of like good energy. And if I'm moping or I'm angry or I'm judgy, that energy is also getting transferred. So you want to be very cautious about what kind of energy are you showing up with, right? So if someone shows up and I'm like, oh yeah, anyone who thinks this is an idiot, I'm bringing negative judgmental energy to the conversation. And if I'm trying to convince someone or persuade someone or influence someone, it's not going to go very far because I'm showing up with negative energy. You want to show up with positive energy. You want to show up with curiosity.
Yes.
You want to show up with warmth and friendliness because then you're creating a safe space for people to open up and be vulnerable to you. If you show up being judgmental, no one is going to be vulnerable. No one is going to open up to you. And
Yeah.
how in the world can you expect to persuade or influence someone if you're showing up with a locked door and like no safe space,
Right.
right?
Yes.
And so I feel like in our country right now, there aren't very many safe spaces because no matter which side you are on, everyone is creating unsafe spaces, right? For someone else to show up and have a differing opinion, you're going to get attacked, you're going to get judged, you're going to be disliked, you're going to get shunned, whatever, right? Name called. And so I feel like if you can create safe spaces with your own community so that it is safe for people to show up and share what they believe in, who they are, regardless of what their values are, you will have a higher chance to influence, persuade, change the world than if you show up with unsafe spaces and locked doors.
I think that is huge. And I know that I was saying before we wrap up, but I'm just going to keep this going with another thought. When you were talking, it just reminded me of somebody that I saw on TikTok, YouTube. I don't remember where. And I didn't know who the person was, had never seen the person. And that person basically said, if you have people in your life who voted for fill in the blank, the candidate that the person didn't like, that you are supposed to cut everybody out of your life, parent, sibling, whoever, cut them out of your life if they voted for this person. And I just remember thinking, wow, wow, really? Is that what we're doing? So I love your heart that you are, hey, let's just come at everybody in these difficult conversations, these hot button conversations with curiosity, with letting people just talk and talk about how they feel. And, oh, did I understand you correctly? And just unlocking the door, opening it up. So you have given such valuable, valuable, valuable information today.
Thank you. And, in reference to that comment of that TikTok person saying, cut everyone out, that is a really great way to silo yourself. And you're going to be an echo chamber. And if you want to be the kind of person who does not get to influence anyone, that's a great way to do it, right?
Right.
I mean, I don't know what else to say about that. If you
Yeah.
want change in the world, you have to create spaces for people who don't think like you do. That is the only way to
Mhm.
create change in the world. If you cut everyone off, you're going to just be speaking in a silo. You don't have to convince anybody of anything because everyone already thinks like you do,
Right.
right?
Wow. Wow. I like that. All
So I
right.
feel like as a country, we have lost the ability to speak and critically and kindly speak and create spaces for people who think differently than us. We've all sort of like lost those communication skills
Right.
to be able to speak with other people who don't have the same values or don't think like we do. So it would be great to see other people cultivating those skills again, because I do feel like it is a lost art.
It is. I just love everything you said. I agree. I'm hoping everybody in the world watches this episode because it's so huge. So huge. So okay, is there anything else before we close out?
So a couple things, yes. So I've got a podcast called Negotiation with Alice. So you can find it on Spotify, you can find it on Apple. So please tune in. And I'm always looking for guests. So if anyone wants to guest, just contact me. And I'm also coming up with a book called Don't Sleep on the Couch, Negotiation with Your Spouse.
I love it.
And so I would love for people to follow me so that they can get the information of when it's going to be published and out for people to buy. But it's basically a way for you to get what you want in your marriage without blowing things up.
Okay, when that comes out, I want you to come back on and let's talk about the book and let's talk about some of those skills. We don't want to cover them all because we want people to go buy your book. So, anyhow, I love that. That is exciting. Okay. All right. And I will put Alice's information down in the description so you can go check out her podcast. Now, again, before we go, one more time. So explain the way that your podcast works, because you have a different take on the way you do it. And I've never heard anybody do something like this. So share with our audience what your podcast is, the formula for it.
So it's very much like a radio talk call-in talk show where the guest, I only have one guest each episode, but the guest shows up and you call in with a question about how do I negotiate a thing, or how do I convince someone to do the thing that I want them to do? And then I answer it, and then we have a discussion about it. So you can say, oh, that's, great, I'm going to try it. Or you might say, I've tried that, it doesn't work. What are the things, right? So you get to come back with some commentary, but I'm basically giving negotiation and communication advice to my guests. And then I publish those so that other people can learn from that as well.
That I love that concept. When you were telling me about it, I thought that is really interesting. So I really like that. Okay. All right. Now I'm going to let you go. It's hard to let you go. I enjoy our time together every time. So come back when your book is out. Let's talk about that. But everybody, go check out her stuff. Listen to her podcast. Alice is amazing. I am so thrilled that I got to know her. So, all right, everybody, we will see you next time. Bye.
Bye.